Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our session today on ASEAN Energizing Asia's Growth. My name is Adam Schwarz. I'm the CEO of Asia Group Advisors based in Singapore, and I'm delighted to be accompanied today and to be able to introduce a very impressive panel that we have from across Southeast Asia. I'll just go from right to left. Starting from my furthest to the right is Dino Patti Djalal, who's an Asia Fellow at the Milken Institute and a former Indonesian ambassador to the United States. To my right is Henry Nguyen, Managing General Partner for IDG Ventures, Vietnam, based in Ho Chi Minh City. To my left, Serge Pun, Executive Chairman of Serge Pun & Associates, based in Yangon. To his left, Secretary Cesar Purisima, Secretary of Finance of the Republic of the Philippines, obviously based in Manila. And to his left, Ravi, Thakran, Managing Partner and Chairman of L Capital Asia and Group President of LVMH, South and Southeast Asia and Middle East. So gentlemen, thank you all very much for joining the panel today. I thought since we've got some tremendous in-country expertise here, so I thought we might at least begin our conversation this morning with a set of country-specific perspectives. But I thought just to kind of get us started, we'd start with a little bit of kind of a look at the region. And Ravi, since you have a regional remit, I might ask you to begin with. Obviously, for the last 18 months or so, much of the coverage and the attention in Asia has been on China and China's decelerating economic growth. Clearly, that's had some negative impacts on a number of the key ASEAN economies, and we've seen some export growth begin to slow. I got a question for you is, how are you looking at the Southeast Asian and the ASEAN economies as a group? Do you see them as indelibly tied to the Chinese economy, or do you see, as the dust settles, ASEAN becoming an alternate driver of growth for the region?
Look, I started my journey in ASEAN about 25 years ago in Singapore and spent about 10 years working for Schwarz Group and after that 15 for LVMH. All these 25 years, the fight in the board was always to get attention to ASEAN. Early days, we were all Japan-centric, then China-centric, and ASEAN was never really kept in perspective. But I can tell you, even in 25 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, ASEAN was already a potent force if one wanted to concentrate on that, but most of the groups never did. They were always focused on the bigger markets. Give you just two stats. ASEAN collectively makes more profit for LVMH than China does. So already. That's despite the fact that our penetration levels, we're just talking Philippines, are abysmal. We have penetration in Indonesia, Vietnam are very, very low. Already make more profit. So if the group started to focus on ASEAN as one region, it certainly will bring phenomenal results. Problem is most groups in the world do not look at ASEAN as one block. They only look at each one separately. And the problem with that is when you rank them separately, they'll rank not in top 10, but you put them together. I can tell you for Schwarz Group as well as for LVMH, they would rank in the top 5, particularly comes to profitability, and it comes revenue top 10 for sure. So that has been the challenge of ASEAN, how to get attention to ASEAN as a block. And now with China slowing down, I believe it's a phenomenal opportunity for ASEAN. Why? Because the other big behemoth, India, is not ready as yet. India is expert in scoring its own goal. They never get the policy whole thing right. Geopolitically, the whole thing is in favor of India, but still, they have their own issues despite having a complete mandate for reforms and progress. So I would say this is a phenomenal time for ASEAN to really rise up and really start acting as a bloc. Phenomenal opportunity for corporates located in the region to start asserting its weight and get more attention.
Great. Serge, I want to ask you to sort of follow up on that same question. You're currently and more recently very focused on Myanmar, but you've had a long investment track record in the region and you travel a great deal around the region. How are you looking at the prospects of the region before we get into a country level vis-a-vis China?
Well, we're definitely not qualified to be buying LVMH goods yet. But overall, I think Myanmar is going through quite a historical transition. And we see ourselves leapfrogging extremely distinctly in virtually all sectors. Telecoms, we're going from Stone Age to 4G in one leap, and so forth. So, in as far as ASEAN is concerned, I think we're the weakest economy in the 10 countries. We're the youngest per se in terms of depth. capacity and so forth. So we do worry a bit about how AEC will actually benefit or actually hurt us. And so in Myanmar itself, I do not see the kind of enthusiasm that I would see in other ASEAN countries probably because of ignorance of how AEC could actually benefit us.
Great. Dino, let me go to you on the other end of our panel on, I guess obviously we talk mainly, and we will be talking mainly in this panel about the opportunities for investors, but obviously there are some concerns that go beyond the economic realm, and one of them which is security. ASEAN as a region, Southeast Asia as a region, has been a peaceful region for many decades. Obviously in the last couple of years there are some concerns about the South China Sea in particular. From your perspective, I guess not so much in your current role, but in your previous role in the diplomatic service, it was an area that you looked at on a very regular basis. How concerned are you? How do you see ASEAN dealing with that issue as a group?
China is a challenge to us. Economically, China is the largest trading partner for, I think, all of ASEAN countries. Now, when they say when China sneezes, then Southeast Asia would catch a cold. They used to say that about the United States. Yeah. So economically, ASEAN wants to be as close as possible to China and reap the benefits in terms of trade, tourism, investment, and others. But strategically, there's a lot of concern about Chinese behavior in South China Sea. A lot of the things that China did recently surprised us. When China clobbered Philippines, for example, during disputes around the overlapping water. That is something that surprised a lot of ASEAN countries. What China did with the reclamation, building 8-story buildings and building runways that is, I think, the longest in South China Sea compared to any other claimants. That also worries us. I think the message from China was that if we want to do something in Southeast Asia, in the South China Sea, there's nothing anybody can do to stop us. Not ASEAN countries, not the United States. So there's ambiguity. Economically, we want to be close, but strategically, there is some anxiety over China's strategic intention, and the big question whether or not China will abide by international law in managing the disputes.
Great. Secretary Purisima, let me turn to you. Maybe segue off that question, and feel free to address that one as well. But I guess if I were to kind of follow up with a more specific question about it is whether this rising attention to that issue in South China Sea is impacting what the Philippines is trying to do economically.
Well, the relationship with China is something that is a complicated one and has many dimensions. Clearly, the one on territories is something where we have a disagreement. But in trade, for example, our trade is growing a healthy 20+%. It's slowly becoming our second, maybe first largest trading partner very soon. In tourism, we're getting increasing number of Chinese tourists. Historically, ASEAN as a whole has a high degree of growth correlation with China. But ASEAN is slowly coming on its own. In fact, in 2013 and 2014, the total FDIs of ASEAN exceeded that of China. And if you look at the fundamentals of ASEAN as one entity, there is a basis for ASEAN to be able to grow in its own as a separate growth engine. One, it has global scale. It's the 4th largest trading nation. If it's one nation, it's the 3rd largest in population, 7th largest in GDP. And if you look at many sectors, it's among the world's leaders, including electronics, garments, ship building. It has good fundamentals in terms of macroeconomy and fiscal. Positive current account balance, healthy reserves among the region, well managed generally. It has good demography. It's as young as India and about 600+ million people. It is geographically well located as potentially a hub to Asia trade. So there are many reasons that I think augur well for the future of ASEAN. as an engine for growth in the Philippines, is positioning itself to make sure that it becomes well connected with ASEAN, which is, compared to China, more globally connected. 60% of ASEAN trade is related to FTAs compared to about 20% to China. So yes, there are issues involving territories, but I think just like in, I'd like to have an analogy with marriages. No, you may have issues, but a lot of people tend to stay married.
Right. Very good. So let's turn our attention now maybe to a couple of series of country-specific perspectives, and I'm going to start with Henry, if I may. By the way, we're going to carve out some time at the end of the session for Q&A if we can, and so feel free to sort of start thinking ahead of any questions you might have. Henry, your focus is Vietnam. So Vietnam has been always a little hard from afar to sort of follow closely Vietnamese politics, but there was a Vietnamese Communist Party Congress in January, which was largely without too much drama, although there was a little bit of drama on the selection of the new prime minister. And more recently, we've had the selection of a new cabinet. Tell us a little bit more your perspective on sort of what you see as the same and what's different, and what can investors expect?
Sure. You know, Vietnam really for the last 15 years has been on a very liberalized economic policy. I don't anticipate that changing. Obviously, with a new government coming into place, there may be some uncertainties in the minds of investors and outsiders, but I think for the most part internally, people expect the direction to remain mostly unchanged. You know, Vietnam has really been pushing to be more globally integrated in terms of trade. So starting with its bilateral trade agreement with the U.S. in the early 2000s, entry into WTO in the mid-2000s, and of course the biggest landmarks now are the free trade agreement with Europe and also with TPP coming on board and hopefully being ratified over the next 12 or so months. All of these are big game changers for Vietnam because it really, in essence, plugs in, you know, really its production capacity and really is drawing foreign direct investment into Vietnam so that it can start taking advantage of these new lower trade tariffs.
What's the attraction of TPP for Vietnam?
You know, I think first and foremost, it basically allows greater access to, you know, I'll say one of Vietnam's most important resources, which is its human capital and labor pool. As I'm sure many of you know in this room, you know, China over the last several years has really become a more difficult place to operate, not only in terms of increasing costs of doing business, particularly in labor costs, but also that I think there's a lot of saturation of other resources. And you know, the China Plus One strategies have been talked about for a long time. And I think Vietnam has been one of the bigger beneficiaries of alternative sources of low-cost labor, of production and manufacturing capabilities. So really that's where the free trade agreements plug back into Vietnam, that it's really setting itself up to be, you know, this new production center in these very expansive trade agreements.
Thank you. Dino, let me, if we sort of return to Indonesia. Indonesia had a new president now, President Jokowi, in power for 18 months. And he has, over the last 8 or 9 months, been pushing forward a very ambitious economic reform program. I believe Indonesia has announced 10, 11, 12 fairly large-scale deregulation packages. They've liberalized the investment regime. It's been sort of came a little bit as a surprise in the sense that he didn't talk about it so much when he first came to power, but he's obviously decided this is going to be the mainstay of his administration. And I guess the question that I certainly hear investors ask is, does he have the political support and the political wherewithal to drive forward with that campaign and get a lot of those measures implemented?
Yeah. Well, first, I think President Jokowi has proved that he's very pro-business, so that's good news. And the first few months of his presidency, I was a bit worried about some measure of economic nationalism, but I think that language has so far dissipated. He replaced his ministers that were showing those signs of economic nationalism with pro-business and globalist personalities. He's established strong targets, aiming at 7% growth at the end of his term. Very strong emphasis on infrastructure and deregulation. He wants to cut down 42,000 laws into half, business regulations. Your question is how can he push to achieve his political agenda? I think he can, but it's going to be a tough challenge. He's got to get the politics right. He has to, I think, get a stronger presence in the parliament and also stronger backing of the PDIP, the political party that endorsed him into power. But he has rebounded from a decline in the polling recently, and he's showing more confidence in becoming more assertive in his political and economic agenda. But his biggest challenge is really to prove the anti-corruption agenda. There are signs that corruption is coming back in the role between the police and the KPK and so on. So he needs to reinforce his message that his government is strongly committed to anti-corruption and able to push his reform agenda.
Right. Now, in Indonesia, the president has a lot of power in many presidential systems to drive a lot of at least policy level reform. But he will need support from the parliament and at least one or two of the big parties. Where do you see that coming from in Indonesia? Where is he going to get the political party support to keep going with this what are you calling the economic openness campaign?
The opposition is not coherent and weaker than before. When the government started, the opposition was coherent, but there was some infightings, and some of the political parties are crossing over to his side. So if he harnesses this, and if he plays the politics right, I think he will get more support for his policies.
Okay. So let's turn to Myanmar, which is it's an interesting panel at this time because we've had political change in Indonesia 18 months ago. Earlier this year in Vietnam, this last November were the landmark elections in Myanmar last November, which we haven't elections in many, many years, over 25 years, which went remarkably peacefully and smoothly, and a great credit to the Myanmar people how well that process has gone. It was a fairly lengthy transition period. But we now have a new government in place. The big question about Aung San Suu Kyi's role seems to be settled, at least for now. And just about a month ago, we've had a new cabinet been established. Now, this new cabinet has come in, and as often when you have, well, as always when you have transitions from long-term authoritarian rule to democracy, you have a lot of people come into government who haven't been in government before, and that is the case in Myanmar today. Now, the context, of course, from an investment perspective, is that over the last 4 years, the previous government, the USDP government, has embarked on very significant economic reforms and opening to trade, to new markets. Yangon is almost unrecognizable today as it was 5 years ago. It's admittedly early days, but how would you characterize the new government in Yangon, this new cabinet? Are we in for a period of pause where people figure out their new jobs, so to speak, or do you feel it'll be a fairly seamless transition on the economic policy side?
Well, I think I'll start by acknowledging that the last 5 years of USDP government under President Thein Sein was quite an achievement. But the achievements can only be seen primarily in social and political reform. He did some great things like freedom of press from a very, very tightly controlled country. When you say anything about the government, about the military, you go to jail straight, to a country where you can say anything and everybody says everything now, and then it's just chaotic. So freedom of press was his biggest, I think, landmark in terms of social reform. He also had a very good labor law. That was one of the first major law being implemented. And many other social reforms. But when it came to business, I fret to say that there was very little achievement. There was a lot of talk, but the capacity at the ministerial level, and the persistence of corruption, graft, has actually made the ministries being very ineffective. And as a result, if you look back 5 years, what achievements can you see in the business sector? You can probably cite a few symbolic things, such as starting a stock exchange and then closing it down for 3 months because there was no listing. So the question is, why do you start it in the first place? Why didn't you wait until there was a listing ready? No, we need to start it because this means this government has done this. But it's form and no substance, and so forth, right? Aung San Suu Kyi came to win this victory, which I felt is very, very important to understand that it's 50 years we have had military rule, and for the first time we have a democratic government. The last 5 years we had a quasi-democratic government, quasi-civilian government, but very much still military control. This time we have a real democratic government. Many democracies in the world, when parties fight for an election and they win by 4 points, 5 points, they're blowing their trumpet. Aung San Suu Kyi won it by 85 points. So there is no issue about mandate. She's got the strongest mandate that any party could ever hope for. So she could push through the upper house, the lower house, the whole parliament, and so forth. Now comes to the cabinet, because we all felt that the lineup of the cabinet is really the distinguishing factor, what will be done in the next 5 years, because that's the people that will actually carry out the work. And when the 20 members were announced, ministers were announced, we came to the conclusion that the choice of the ministers is very evidently to be, number one criteria, you have to be a good person. A good person defined as rid of any scandals, he's not corrupt, he's got a good track record, he's a nice man, he's an honorable man. So by and large you can say all the lineup are in that category. But 50% of that, you can say they're good people and they're capable people with certain track records of being able to do things right and make things happen. The other 50%, I can only say they're good people untested. So we have to see over the next few months and few years how these ministers will be performing their duties. And if they can do a good job, I think we will really go like a rocket. I maintain the fact that if you are a good person, if you are void of corruption, and if you have a good agenda, you cannot make too serious a mistake. You can make some mistakes, but they cannot be too bad. It's only when you're corrupt and you're bent and you have a personal agenda and all the decisions are really not for the people, for the country. And that's where things happen wrong. So I'm very optimistic of the future. I think she's got a great future lying ahead. She knows she's got a lot of challenges. But I just want to share, in closing, something about the world saying that she has got no experience. She's sort of unknown as far as a government is concerned, only as an activist and so forth. But in the last few months, I think her political savvy has come out quite evident. She is not permitted to be president. The Constitution doesn't allow her. Right? So she has a president, and she has now become a state councillor, a position that they tabled and was unanimous, and was majorly passed in both the houses. So now she's a state councillor. The military objected to that, but it didn't matter because they have all the votes. So she is the sole state councillor, which means that she has a lot more power than you might think. But then the other interesting thing is that she is the foreign minister. And that's why you see it's not a head of states visiting Myanmar now, it's all foreign ministers line up, one after another, whole queue of foreign ministers, because she is the one that people want to see. The 20 ministries have decided, the government decided that there'll be no deputy ministers in any ministry. That will save the country zillions of chats. No deputy ministers. There's only one ministry that will have a deputy minister, and that is the foreign ministry. The minister is Aung San Suu Kyi. The deputy minister is the president of the country. So in the state organization, the president is number one, and she is a state councillor. In the foreign ministry, she is number one, and the president is a deputy. Very, very good footwork.
Serge, let me ask one follow-up question, if I may. I think clearly her, as you say, I think the phrase you use is political savvy was on great display over the last couple of months, sort of navigating that overwhelming electoral victory in November through to the selection of the president and the formation of the cabinet and the way she was managing the military. Very, as you say, for someone who's not been in formal politics for a very long time, very sophisticated couple of months. Naturally, and for very good reasons, much of the political campaign was on political issues and democracy and freedom and et cetera. Not so much on economic policy, some but not a lot. What can you tell us about what her thinking is on Myanmar's economic integration with the region and first, I suppose, later with the world, and in particular the role of foreign investors as she sees in Myanmar going forward?
Well, I think it is very, very clear, without any shade of a doubt, that she realizes that for her programs to succeed, it has to be by the business community, by the private enterprises. The country is not rich. We don't have reserves galore. We will have to rely on the private sector to provide the jobs and to turn the country around economically. As far as that is concerned, I do not think she or any of her advisors have a problem. Okay? Nationalism, some, only because I think they felt that in the past, the deals that the foreigners have come to make with Myanmar has always, in a way, ended up with Myanmar as a country holding the short end of the stick. And that is, I think, not because the foreigners wanted to screw Myanmar. I think that's because of the people who were in power negotiating the deal. At the end, I think the country was the one that got the least. Okay. So that stigma still hangs around. So there's a bit of concern that whether it's the West or whether it's China or whether it's ASEAN, we will always be the one to suffer, and the investors will get everything. This is going to, I think, change as we see a better capacity in terms of how she treats this. Now, take the copper mine, for instance. It's a Chinese issue, the Chinese copper mine, where there's big protests and so forth. This is the Thein Sein government headache, but Thein Sein actually asked her to chair the committee to investigate, and she actually signed off a report as chairman of the committee in support of the project, but giving a very clear result of how much compensation should be paid to the farmers and so forth. In that incident, I think we learned one thing, that she is not a populist sort of leader. She would go against populism. And that to me is a great, great insurance. We have too many leaders that would try to be popular and then screw up the country.
Thank you. Secretary Purisima, let me now turn to the Philippines, which is I was going to say, almost our most recent, but it's actually just about to happen, election for our panel. We have elections next week, next Tuesday, I believe, in the Philippines. It's been a very good year, a very good term, 6 years for the Philippines under President Aquino, who has launched a number of reforms. FDI has been up considerably, growth rates have been up, the ratings for the country have gone up. The front runner for the elections comes out of a different political mold than the current President Aquino. How do you, as you look ahead, as you could gaze into your crystal ball, what lies ahead in terms of any meaningful shifts in economic policy going forward?
Before I answer that, may I just comment on the TPP question, because I believe it's important on the potential of ASEAN as one economic bloc. As TPP poses a challenge for ASEAN as a whole, because once implemented, 4 countries within ASEAN that are members of TPP would have a substantial advantage over a major market, portion of the market of the world. Just for example, the garments. Vietnam garments would have a 20% advantage over Malaysia, Thailand, Philippine garments. No? And that is why I think it's important that the rest of ASEAN actually should be invited to TPP, because I think it's to the interest of the US and the rest of the world that ASEAN is stronger rather than weaker. It's, I think, an opportunity, TPP. I hope that they approach it similar to RCEP. Now, the challenge, though, with free trade agreements is that the benefits of free trade tend to materialize later than the nightmares that are thought of as the negative impact of free trade, such as people losing jobs. No? And this mismatch creates political issues, and that we're facing as we, for example, continue to open up the economy, no? Especially in today's world of internet and mobile telephony. In the Philippines, we've had the best 6 years, the last 50 years. And that's because of better governance that has resulted to confidence by the international community in the country and of the Filipinos themselves. Except that that has opened up, especially in this age, as I mentioned, of internet and access to information, a mismatch in terms of the aspirations and the ability of government to deliver on that, even though it has accelerated. And as a result, the candidate that's winning is that of the opposition, because ours is a US-style democracy. In a US-style democracy, you tend to have to divide the population, and you have to take extremist positions to be able to gain your share of the voting population. But if you see through the people behind the leading candidate, I believe that the general economic direction would be the same. The tone, the style, and maybe some emphasis may differ. For example, the current candidate's talking about adopting a federal form of government. If done properly, I believe it further strengthens the country, because it will allow better distribution of resources across the Philippines rather than just at the center, which would help accelerate development. And as it is, we're seeing about 20 economic regions being developed in the country. I do hope that just like what the U.S. is facing, Trump, we see him tone down when he becomes president and be more careful with the language. But when I look behind, the advisors, they are respectable financial and economic people. So I don't have any concern that it will change substantially. What I would like to see is that the process is credible and that the winner has a strong mandate. Because to push through with the reform agenda, you need political capital.
Right. Thank you. I want to take you up on the theme of kind of regionalization and kind of what that might mean for the region going forward. But just before we get there, let me ask Ravi, from your perspective across different sectors as an investor, what do you see as the most promising investment sectors across the region?
Look, Asia is sitting on a huge opportunity. And I say that for two. See, we started the whole century with the first decade focus on Asia is going to be the future. China is going to be #1 economy soon. And in the last few years, that whole argument is lost because of South China Sea problem, political issues, China slowdown, etc. I want to focus. It is still going to be Asian century. China is still going to become #1 economy. And I think the opportunity for all of Asia is huge, simply because no one works as hard. Our stores are open for 363 days a year. Only Chinese New Year maybe for 2 days we close. We open from 9 to 10 p.m. everybody gets up in the morning, hundreds of millions of people, not only China, plug in 600 million people in ASEAN, get up in the morning to just get ahead in life. That drive is there. I think if anything that will stop is us only. We have the greatest opportunity, but also we could be our own enemy on that. And I think the biggest problem could be, as Mao said long back, we have 70 years of peace, we'll be number one. And I think that is one China certainly made a mistake of showing his fangs too early. There's no need. Only one who will pay price for that is Asia. And I think for ASEAN, it's a great opportunity now to rise. I'll tell you, across sectors. So I'll give you an example. Garments, as the Secretary mentioned, 83% of garments are made in Asia, and only 11% of the value resides in Asia. Watches, where I spend a lot, about 93% of the watches are made in Asia, 93. 82% of them in China alone, but only 6% of the value resides in Asia. Swiss guys who take 45 days holiday during summer and much more during the year, those guys have 83% of total value. So the Asians are producing the most, and by now actually also consuming the most. China by far is also the largest consumer of watches by revenue. But no, not even one brand has even 100 million revenue. So the opportunity is learning from the West on all these basics of how to build a brand, how to package it better, how to present it better, how to tell a story better. The day we can learn that, I think across segments, and we see that opportunity in garments, we see that in accessories, we see that in all kind of lifestyle consumption of middle class. And all of that, I think, is a huge arena to invest in. And if we stay focused, I think certainly we'll come out as winners.
Interesting. Thank you. So let me now turn back to Dino and maybe ask Secretary Purisima to jump in on this one as well, which is really about ASEAN. Now ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has been the preeminent only real region-wide grouping. It has a political component, a security component, and an economic component. The mainstay of the economic component has been the ASEAN Economic Community, which actually just was launched last year in 2015. I mean, Indonesia is the largest economy and the leader of ASEAN. Tell us a little bit, Dino, how you see the AEC, its role, both in terms of two questions really. One is, within ASEAN, are you seeing an increase in political interest and will to really engage in economic integration? And secondly, where does the AEC fit in now for Indonesia relative to some of these broader economic integration niches out there, the TPP being one of them, but the Comprehensive Economic Partnership with the EU being another?
The AEC now is officially enforced since the beginning of this year. And it has become more economically relevant to ASEAN economies. Trade, intra-ASEAN trade used to be about 5-10%, now it's about 15%. And it's 25%. 25%. And if it grows to 40%, then that's an additional $1.2 trillion, which is quite a lot of opportunity for everyone else. So the key is big businesses like the ASEAN Economic Community, but the challenge is how to engage more small and medium and micro enterprises into the act. Yeah? Because I know Cesar has always said that ASEAN must integrate not just at the top, but also at the bottom. And the other challenge is how do we get ASEAN Economic Community to be known more to ASEAN people. In Indonesia, there was a poll recently that found less than 16% in people in certain cities knows about the ASEAN community. I think the number is much lower. I think less than 1% of Indonesians know what actually is the ASEAN Economic Community. The challenge is now getting RCEP into greater progress. The negotiations has slowed down a little bit, but I think we're on the way of speeding up the negotiations for RCEP, which is the regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Indonesia is interested to join the TPP, but President Jokowi has said that probably not for another 2 or 3 years. I think I agree with Cesar. There should be more ASEAN countries also joining the TPP. For Indonesia now, we are negotiating closely with the EU to establish a closer trading arrangement. Perhaps that will come first before we join the TPP.
I'm going to ask one more question, Vietnam connected, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for Q&A. Henry, Vietnam, one of 4 ASEAN countries that actually is a signatory to the TPP, and many studies suggest that it will actually be the largest single beneficiary proportionally, assuming it gets fully ratified and implemented. One of the kind of tougher things that general economists say that Vietnam is going to have to tackle in meeting the TPP is going to be reforming state-owned enterprises, and it was sort of a sticking point in the conversation leading up to the signing. What practically on the ground, what do you think that is going to mean? Is there a lot of political resistance to that? Does that if there is more transparency and competition applied to the SOEs, does that potentially create more opportunity for private sector investors?
You know, I think in the whole negotiation process, you know, the U.S. did use a lot of its leverage to make sure that, you know, for Vietnam to really realize a lot of the trade benefits, it would have to reach some very significant milestones when it comes to labor laws and unions, when it came to SOE reform. And obviously, I think, I'll put it this way, I think Vietnam wasn't necessarily resistant to those changes. And in fact, I think politically, you know, a lot of the leadership in Vietnam realized that these changes had to happen and would be beneficial for Vietnam. I think it's more about the timeline and how really, I'll say there's reciprocity to the deal. But like you said, Adam, I think on the whole, Vietnam is going to be a significant beneficiary to this. Quantifying it as the big winner, it's hard to say. I think there's obviously a lot of what I'll say challenges that will come about in just implementation of the agreement, and then of course really scaling up Vietnam, because you know, I think like a lot of countries in the region, maybe Vietnam is even a little bit more behind in this fact, is that you know, it's never really industrialized. Really what has been sort of its great industrial revolution has only happened over the last 15 or so years. And so I think there's a lot of concurrent, what I'll say, changes that are happening in Vietnam that will, I'll say, in a certain way, kind of creates a lot of opportunity. If you look at things like a lot of the political liberalization that's been happening, that led to trade liberalization, and now this industrialization. You've got, like a lot of parts of Southeast Asia, you know, these ideal demographics now that, you know, they like to call it sort of the 8X or 9X generation, you know, the post-war baby boom, you know, in the 80s and 90s now. This is a young generation that's entering into its productive phase of sort of labor productivity. And then I think grafted on all of that, and I think this is where one of the interesting things to see what will happen in Southeast Asia is you have this massive global technology revolution. You know, connectivity in terms of just, you know, inside a country to media, to information, even to government, is greater than it's ever been. And then even, you know, in terms of trade and information to the rest of the region and to the rest of the world, I think these are the type of macro forces that are going to have massive effects, not only in Southeast Asia, but the rest of the world. And I think those are the type of connectivity maps that really going to really determine, I'll say, competitiveness of countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, to the rest of the world, and then as a bloc to even its other, I'll say, intra-Asian sort of bookends in terms of China and India. So I think in many ways, TPP is going to be a net victory for Vietnam, because I think it's going to help accelerate a lot of reforms that I think are going to be necessary for Vietnam if it's going to, you know, really continue to move forward in its development economically, socially, and politically.
Great, thank you. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions from the floor, and we'll do that if there are. Otherwise, we'll continue our conversation up here. Yes, sir, in the front.
Yeah, just a question. Oh.
Could you tell us who you are, please? Thank you.
Mark Gordon, Treasurer of Wyoming. Just a quick question on the evolution of the regulatory structure in each of your countries. What you see, if there's a model, how you see them developing over time. Are there risks present, that sort of thing?
Could you say a bit more what you mean about the regulatory change?
Well, security regulation, how you see the capital markets evolving, any kind of governmental strictures that are put on the types of investments that can happen, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. Secretary, do you want to crack at that?
The ASEAN, when you look at it, is a group of very diverse countries. They're at various stages of development. Singapore on the one extreme, that's first world. And on the other extreme, you have some of the smallest and the least developed countries. Then you have Indonesia, one of the world's largest. And that is part of the miracle of ASEAN, the fact that we've been able to move forward a very diverse group using what we call the ASEAN way. Basically, it's the 1+ system where if one plus another is available, then we move forward and we wait for others to come on board. And by showing the benefits of integration, I think that's been the biggest tool towards moving ASEAN forward. For example, the 11 industries that were integrated ahead of AEC in 2015, electronics. No? ASEAN's the world's largest electronics producer now. Open skies. No? ASEAN got over 100 million tourists last year, with over 50% coming from within ASEAN. Garments, you can look at many items. It just shows that if we stand alone individually, we're all small except probably Indonesia. And the way forward is to cooperate so that we can move to a point where we achieve scale and attract investments. And we're doing that, as I mentioned, for 2 straight years. We have more FDIs than China. But we do have challenges. No? For example, the infrastructure gap. No? When you visit our countries, you have some of the world's best infrastructure. And in the Philippines, we have challenges on traffic, airports, ports, everything. No? And unlike EU, we don't have a Germany. And therefore, the key for our region is really to mobilize private capital so that we can direct it towards infrastructure. And slowly, for example, in the banking sector, in the financial sector, we're on the 7th package of liberalization, and we're marching forward. But the only way this ASEAN vision can become a reality is if we are able to develop an ASEAN capital market and a category of investment product that's ASEAN, so that we deepen the capital markets, make it cheaper to get capital, and recycle ASEAN capital within ASEAN so that we can direct it to where we need it. But the potential is there, as I agree with Ravi. We have, by 2020, 400 million people in the middle class, which is 20% of Asia. In fact, Asia as a whole will have 2/3 of the world's middle class. And the middle class are the consuming engine. They are the aspirational spenders. And the growth in disposable income in the region is 40%. That's unheard of. I mean, and that's why I think if we don't shoot ourselves in the foot by letting these agreements get out of hand, and not just accepting the fact that you can have disagreements and move forward on other aspects, I think ASEAN will become one of the engines for growth in the next 30 to 40 years.
Let me just sort of take advantage of my moderator role here for a sec to ask Ravi to follow on to that comment and the shooting in the foot comment. Ravi, you gave some very interesting statistics earlier about the amounts of production versus value add in the region on watches, electronics, et cetera. What is it going to take to increase the value add component in Asia? Why is the value add take so low relative to the size of production and consumption of key products? Is that a function of educational attainment? Is it a function of capital? Is it a function of policy obstructions? Where would you look to for change to try to see that a fairly quick rise in the value added component staying in Asia?
Look, there are many aspects to it, but just one quick comment before. See, look, today, US is one big behemoth, EU is another one, and East Asia is already one. If you combine China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, Hong Kong is already similar size. The real opportunity lies now within the Southeast, South, and West Asia, which often called Middle East. And within that, I think ASEAN is the biggest opportunity in front of us, the most stable, most dynamic to pick up that opportunity. And therefore, I think that is the region where one should look at for investment most after these. What is required to transition? Look, Asia already is factory of the world across any category. You can't find a category where Asia is not really the factory of the world. China is the ground zero, but now when China is becoming more expensive, other countries are picking up back again, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. But in that whole journey, the biggest issue with Asians, one is not traveling the last mile. You know, always basically cutting short on really finishing the piece. Despite having had incredible heritage for centuries, for hundreds of years, we were the best place for best fabrics, best ceramics, best of almost everything. But I must say that today they have started to pick up. So we need to learn how Japanese whiskey is again staged to come back and is now the best whiskey in the world, not the Scottish. Similarly, you can see a chocolate brand like Royce from Hokkaido can become better than almost any other chocolate brand in the world. Similarly, category after category, there are players coming up. You know, the Serge Chen from Taiwan in fashion, or Liu Li Gongfang for the category where Yadro and others used to be big, or even a small Din Tai Fung making dim sums, again making it getting Michelin star for a meal that you spend only $20 and not $200. I think what is the beauty on these examples is the guys who are able to go beyond production and really tell a story, build a concept, package it very well, represent it very well, take it to the world. So that thing, the finesse, traveling the last mile, telling the story, doing the whole poetry around. What is Vuitton was just $145 million business when we acquired it. Today is $11.8 billion business. Do we make anything different? No. It's just that we tell the story differently, package it differently, present it differently. Once Asia learns that, I generally believe there'll be a huge transfer of value back to Asia. Because, as I said, China is not only the largest producer, it's by far the largest consumer of watches. And despite that not having even a single brand worth 100 million, it's a shame. It's basically because they don't travel that. And even the made in bag, I can tell you, all of you wearing Swiss watches, 90% of the watches, the made in Switzerland is fake, because all the components are made in China. Then they're taken to Switzerland. They're assembled there for 6 francs max. And by adding one component, which is the spring perhaps, which can be on paper valued more than 50% total value, you can call it made in Switzerland. So this is a typical case of where a particular country is able to keep all the value because they know the power of brand. What they're controlling is not that assembly. What they're controlling is the way of building a brand. That is what we need to learn in Asia. The day we learn, I think certainly we can do it.
Interesting.
Even the box is made in Asia.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, over on the side, please.
Ryan Pritzine from Reservoir Capital. This is for Serge, and I was wondering, given the evolution of what's going on in Myanmar right now, what are the investment and business opportunities that you're most excited about within the country?
Everything. To be honest, there are so many opportunities that it's difficult to say which one is better. Depending on the capital size you have to invest, depending on your own horizons of how long you want to invest, I think you could basically find something, whether it's an infrastructure, which requires massive investments, long payback periods, or whether it's in manufacturing, which is what we're talking about, Burma trying to pick up the slack, where China manufacturing entities have found it too expensive today in China, and they're looking for an alternative. We have, our labor cost is probably 1/3 of China, probably a little sort of over half of the other ASEAN countries. So we do have the condition to produce a lot of labor-intensive goods. And that's what we need. 2 million jobs is the headline. And 2 million jobs is no big deal. It's 2,000 factories, each employing 1,000 workers, and you got 2 million jobs. And 1,000 worker factory in China is a dime a dozen, you see. So we're going for that. Now, there's debate going on whether Burma should really go for that and become the sweatshop. We think we can avoid being a sweatshop, having learned all the lessons of other countries that went through that process, and don't be a sweatshop. But there's also this big talk, which I personally find it very interesting, that the millions of jobs that we're trying to create conventionally is all about manufacturing, sewing machines, row after row, assembling white goods, making shoes. But if you look at it, we're an agricultural country. 70% of our people are farmers. 65% of our land is arable land. And yet we have very low technology. The agricultural industry actually could be a bigger employer than the manufacturing industry if you have the right policies in place. So instead of solely thinking of the manufacturing industry for jobs, we should be thinking of the agricultural industry to provide the long-sustaining jobs, and which is a natural for us. So these are the debates that are going on. But for short-term wins, whether you want to come and do an IPP, produce electricity because we are in dire need of electricity, or whether you want to come in and do services, we recently, for the first time, launched KFC. KFC have never been in Myanmar. We were the first one to launch KFC. And believe me, we have today, only in a matter of just less than a year, 6 KFC shops. 4 of them broke the world record of turnover. I mean, a number of people want to try KFC. They come from 50 miles just so that they can buy a KFC. And they want that bucket because they want to display it in the house saying, I have a bucket of KFC. So many opportunities.
Another good example, the branding. Right. Yeah, absolutely. We have time for one more question if we have one. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Monica Whaley. Thank you. I'm the president of the National Center for APEC here in the United States. And APEC has been to Indonesia in the last 2 years. I work closely with Ambassador Dino. Just last year in the Philippines, and next up is Vietnam, actually after Peru's this year. So, but during the Philippines year, Secretary Purisima did a fantastic job launching something called the Cebu Action Plan. One of the elements of which, a key element of which, is this issue of infrastructure financing. I was just wondering if you have advice for your Vietnamese finance minister colleague on how we can take that to the next level, because in our recent meetings in Papua New Guinea, obviously the need for this infrastructure development is really key, and yet there's Asia Infrastructure Bank and a number of other sources of financing. It's the projects that seem to be the lagging piece. So I was wondering if you wanted to comment on that.
Well, first point is that with AIIB or ADB and other multinationals, multilaterals, we don't have enough money. We really need to involve the private sector. And that is why the PPP concept is something that we need to push. But PPP per se is a complicated vehicle. And that is why in APEC we must establish standards. Standards so that the terms are standardized so that you can reduce the complexity. To have a passport. So if you're registered for PPP in one country, you don't have to re-register in another APEC country. You simplify something that's already complicated. So my advice to my friends in Vietnam is pick up what was taken up in the Philippines, in Peru, and let's move it to the next level so that we can make it a reality. If we can have a database of best practices, that will cut short the development of a project by a mile. And I think APEC is a very good vehicle because it is something where you can talk aloud and not be worried that you're committing yourself to whatever you're saying. So it's a way to come up with new ideas.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have exhausted our allotted hour for this conversation. I feel a little bit chagrined about because there's so much more to talk about. But anyway, thank you very much to all the panels, and I ask you all to join me in thanking them.